Hi, Mizzo here. Okay, so we've talked a lot about persuasion, but I've got one more little thing that I want to make sure you know. So a lot of times people struggle with persuasion, and these little tips can help you figure out how to do persuasion. So you hopefully have watched the video about, well, the two videos about values, beliefs, attitudes, behavior, right? So in terms of thinking of that and thinking about how to change those, there are some tips that you want to do when you're persuading someone. So the first thing is you don't want to make your audience feel like idiots. So I'm gonna do an example. We don't need this right now. We're gonna need that in a second. Okay, this is my sister. Okay, and so if we had a class, I would ask the class, how many of you wear your seatbelt all the time, every time you get in the car, all the time? You don't know. Most of the time?
Sometimes.
Yeah, okay.
Most of the time.
Most of the time, right? So let's say I then am the speaker, and then my persuasion to you all is wear your damn seatbelt. Just wear your seatbelt. It's not hard. It's very simple. You put the seatbelt on, hear all the facts about how seatbelts save your life. Like, it's very easy. You're an idiot if you don't wear your seatbelt. Are you persuaded?
No.
Do you hate me a little bit right now?
I want to use that.
Yeah. So that's not going to persuade your audience. If you're trying to get your audience to quit smoking, telling people they're idiots for smoking, right, isn't going to work. And when we talk about Publix, we're going to make sure that we know that the only people you can persuade in your audience are people who fit the target audience you're talking to, right? And who could be persuaded. Okay, so if I asked the class, how many of you wear your seatbelt all the time, every time, and every person raised their hand, I don't have an audience anymore. I'm just, like, because I can't persuade the people who already wear their seatbelt. They already wear their seatbelt, which leads us to, so really quick before I lead to that, if Tiffany is like an old dude who has never worn his seatbelt and is never gonna effing wear his seatbelt no matter what I say, he's also not persuadable because nothing could persuade him. So he's not in a group of people that could be persuaded. So the people who already do what you're asking or who already believe what you want them to shift to, right, they can't be persuaded because they already agree with you. And the people who will never change no matter what, they're not in your group. You're trying to target the people who could be persuaded, who can do the change you're asking for. Does that make sense? Who can do the change you're asking for and who could be persuaded, okay? So remember how I said if everybody raised their hand, I have no audience, right? Because you cannot change the status quo. The status quo is what already exists. Tiffany, wear a Bob Ross t-shirt. No, I'm serious. Please put a Bob Ross t-shirt on.
But I am.
Yeah, see, it's dumb. It sounds so silly, right? Tiffany, hold this spatula. No, seriously, Tiff, could you just hold the spatula? I would really like it if you held the spatula.
Like it this way?
Yeah, it's so silly,
like
right? If I'm persuading, keep holding the spatula. If I'm persuading you that we should, have legal marriage for all sexes, I used to hear speeches about that all the time. Do you know when they stopped? 2015. July of 2015, we legalized same-sex marriage. I never heard another persuasion about it because I didn't have to, because it existed. It was now the status quo. The change had happened. Now, I have heard speeches on adoption and rights. It's not like that problem is completely solved, but that specific target is now status quo. Now, here's the only exception. You can persuade the status quo if you can show threat. So if I say, Tiff, please hold that spatula. Please hold that spatula. That sounds silly. But if there's a threat, Tiff, hold the spatula. You have to hold the spatula, Tiff. Hold it. See, there's threat. Now I can persuade the status quo. Thank you. This comes in handy in terms of like Education funding. So let's say we have, I had a student once doing research on a school lunch program, and she's like, this program is good and it should stay. And I was like, well, it's already here. You can't persuade that. And she was like, what? And I was like, well, is there anyone trying to take it away? She's like, oh yeah, they've been trying to cancel this program for years. And I was like, oh, then, right, you have to show they're trying to cancel it. And if you can show enough threat, then you can persuade to keep it, even if it's already here. If you're going to persuade for something that exists or that is the status quo, you have to show that there's a threat against it and then argue why we need to keep it, right? Reproductive rights are like this right now. So currently reproductive rights are legal in the US, meaning I can have an abortion surgery if I want one. But there are a lot of side laws and state laws that limit that. And Republicans and conservatives have been trying for years to change that amendment. Roe v. Wade. They've been trying to reverse Roe v. Wade. And so all I have to do in order to talk about reproductive rights to say we need them and here's why we need them and here's why they need to be safe and legal is to show threat, right? So if I can show that these laws are in threat, which there's tons of evidence in this case that they are, I can persuade the status quo, even though right now abortion is legal. Does that make sense? So if you're going to persuade the status quo in your second speech, make sure you're showing sufficient enough threat, and make sure you're crafting an argument for a target audience that could be persuaded, and you're doing so in a way that's actually persuasive and not shaming their values or beliefs, or their behavior or attitudes, as far as that goes. Okay? Yay! Have a beautiful day. Thanks, Tiff.